Okay, this video is soy a health food? So the first thing that comes up is soy, like flax, has got like more than 10,000 times as much estrogen as lots of foods. It's got tons and tons of estrogenic chemicals in it. The most common one is genistein. Flax, by the way, has tons more estrogen than soy does. And the basic joke is it's obvious why, a human woman has estrogen. She's got breasts, she's got a Virginia, she reproduces that way. Soy plant doesn't have any breasts, doesn't have a Virginia. Why does it have such high estrogen? Of course, because it uses it as a herbicide, as a pesticide, I'm saying, to prevent the animal that eats it, makes it become infertile. Just like, the birth control pill EE2, ethinyl estradiol. So soy can also be goitrogenic, so make the animal sort of tired and stupid. So all these estrogens, they're basically a pesticide for humans. Human is the pest in this case as far as the soy plant is concerned. The other thing, lots of guys, beer belly, they think it's no big deal. No, you look like a pregnant female with man boobs, okay? It's nothing to be proud of. There's estrogens in the beer hops. All right, flax has a type of estrogen called lignans. It's plant estrogen. Soy, it tends to be isoflavones, especially genistein. And like I said, it's like almost at the 10,000 level here. All right, look at that compared to, black beans have like almost nothing, and other beans even lower. Okay, great. The best book on estrogen chemicals, estrogenic chemical exposures is Anthony J's Estrogeneration. Pretty recent book, okay. All right, so Aristotle has a principle that a thing cannot be one thing and not be that thing. And what I'm saying is soy is over and over and over again proven to be estrogenic in animals, and there's some evidence that it's estrogenic in the human papers. There's a whole bunch of case reports and other papers, and there's even one by Agent or something. I'll come to that paper a little later. Soy is also proven to activate both the ER beta, estrogen receptor beta, and the estrogen receptor alpha. The ER beta, so remember beta for beautiful is the good one because it does some of the good things that estrogen does, and then alpha is, you can remember A for alpha, A for S in this context, or the bad one. That's more of the sexual characteristics and associated with increasing the risk of breast cancer. Soy is associated with lower sperm counts in human men, abnormal female uterus in females. There are real problems with soy. It gets totally overhyped. There's lots of case reports of it being associated with premature puberty, premature thalarc, for example. It's estrogenic, okay? That's an important point. Okay, now here's a quote by, you say to yourself, why do you hear so much contradictory information? I think there's a big movement afoot that wants to switch people over to plant foods instead of animal foods because it'll free up a bunch of land. Cattle waste a lot of land. But I think that the corporations that want people eating plant foods, they don't want them to be healthy. They want them to eat a high-fat plant diet because the high fat will keep people fat and sick. And also exposing them to all these chemicals. So here's a quote by George Orwell from his book 1984. He said, "Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. It was as though some huge force was pressing down on you, something that penetrated inside your skull, battering your brain, frightening you out of your beliefs, persuading you almost to deny the evidence of your senses. In the end, the party would announce that 2 plus 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make this claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly demanded by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. And yet, this is Winston speaking now in 1984, and yet he was right. They were wrong and he was right. The obvious, the silly, the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall towards the earth's center. With that feeling that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 makes 4. 2 plus 2 makes 4. And if that is granted, all else follows." George Orwell from 1984. And it's the same thing with soy. It's estrogenic, 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 estrogenic all over the place, including in humans. Yeah, it's estrogenic, and the corporation can say all they want it's not, and I think they're wrong. Okay, so anyways, here's the chemistry of it. The genistein molecule has this little benzene ring-like structure and a hydroxyl group on it, and that's thought to activate the estrogen receptor, mimicking, normal estrogen. It might be less potent, but the levels can be so high in humans. Forms a hydrogen bond with the estrogen receptor. And it's been shown that you can get just as good a crop yields with organic farming as you can with this non-organic GMO, heavily herbicide sprayed stuff. It's all BS, them claiming that it's necessary to feed the world. BS. What are they doing now? Claiming that they can't feed the world with it. So don't be a chump, okay? Corporations are always going to lie. They're always going to, when they claim they did science, 99.9% of the time in my experience, they're just trying to advertise their products, okay? It's actually hard to obtain non-biased science on a commercial product in the modern world. That's why you got to look at the old studies and the animal studies. They're much more likely to be honest than anything funded by any corporation. Soy has been shown in these animal studies to be goitrogenic, impair thyroid function. And again, it makes sense that it's like a herbicide, pesticide to prevent animals from eating it. Soy doesn't want to be eaten, unlike some other plants. Soybean-induced goiter, here it is in humans, having a negative thyroid effect that disappeared when they got rid of it. And those are old papers before the day's commercial. We talked about this already, the lack of why does soy have estrogenic effects. Okay, phytochemicals for prevention. It is low in methionine, so soy is not as toxic as animal protein, so I'll give it credit for that. Okay, soy caused increased growth of human breast cancer cells. Here, these are human breast cancer cells in vivo cultures. And soy increased the cancer growth, this paper by Aldred here. It also increases breast cancer in mice. That's certainly worrisome. It increases insulin-like growth factor, which is associated with increased cancer of multiple different types. That's worrisome. Contains heme iron. That's worrisome. Okay, here's a paper by Aldred. In summary, the glycoside genistein can stimulate estrogen-dependent breast cell cancer growth in vivo. Removal of these chemicals, genistein and genistein, from the diet caused the tumors to regress. These are human breast cancer cells. Human breast cancer cells, okay? Okay, now here's a famous study. This was done by Mueller. I call this the Mueller study in 2004. Stephen Mueller. Phytoestrogens and their human metabolites on estrogen receptors, ER alpha, estrogen receptor alpha, and ER beta, estrogen receptor beta, from the Journal of Toxicology and Science. Okay, 2004. So the results, here's the point. Everybody says, well, look, it shows that soy just activates ER beta, the good ones, beta for beautiful, but not alpha. No, it activates alpha quite a bit. Not quite as much as beta right here, but quite a bit. And you got to remember, the concentrations can be extraordinarily high in the blood from these chemicals, especially in babies, but it's not what you want, okay? And here's, in part of the paper, they sort of had two parts to the experiment. In one part of the experiment, actually, the alpha receptor was, here's ER alpha, here's ER beta. The alpha receptor was activated even more in the second half of the study than was the beta receptor, okay? Look over here. Here we're at the 4. Here we're sort of at the 8, or at least the 6 there. So activation of ER alpha more than beta. This is figure 5 from that article. It's free. You can look it up. Usually they hide articles that they think aren't supporting the commercial product. You look at something that supports a commercial product, you'll often get the free article. But when you go and try to study articles that criticize a product, quite often you'll find you'll never get the paper, hardly ever. And then even if you get the abstract, a lot of times you won't even get an abstract. They hide those papers from the public, okay? It's true. Okay, soy increases insulin-like growth factor. Insulin-like growth factor increases cancer. Soy is pretty high in fat, like at least like 37% of the calories from fat. They've shown in humans that ingesting soy lowers sperm counts. It lowered sperm counts in this paper, and this was done at Harvard, Massachusetts General Hospital. It calls itself man's greatest hospital, but it's actually good at conventional medicine and some specialty stuff. But like all modern university hospitals, it stinks at treating chronic disease because it pretends that diet and toxins don't exist, but they're the most common causes of disease. So how could any hospital be good at treating chronic disease unless it acknowledges the importance of diet and toxicology? Come on. Okay, so what am I saying? The soy was lowering sperm count per milliliter, that's a tiny little thing, per milliliter, by 41 million fewer sperm. Okay, it's like a chemical castration. Now, what kind of a guy would want to drink that? An idiot, in my opinion, okay? Look at that. I mean, what more do you want? 41 million? That's a lot. 41 million? Okay, more stuff on soy. Causing precocious puberty. Flark is breast development, okay, in a young girl, all right? Influence on the onset and tempo of puberty, and then it goes away when she stops, okay? Experts in the field have debated whether these trends should lead clinicians to reconsider the lower age. So yeah, then they talk about changing the age of puberty because so many kids are in premature puberty now. Yeah, because they're being poisoned with all these estrogens. It's in their baby formulas, their mother's eating it, getting it in their breast milk. It's in all the processed food. It's in cow's milk. It's in soy milk. Yeah, so many people are confused about their gender. Part of it is they're being poisoned by tons and tons of estrogenic chemicals. It's in their water. It's in their drinking water. They sort of are conditioned to eat meat and processed food, which further decreases their body's ability to excrete estrogen. We talked about that earlier in a previous lecture. So yeah, there's a real reason. This estrogen stuff is no big deal. It's off the charts. People are ingesting estrogen because they're ignoramuses and they're being poisoned by it, okay? They're off the chart estrogen exposures, okay? And the smart thing is to just learn how to avoid all this stuff. It's never going to go away. Anything commercially profitable is always going to be in the stores, but you just have to learn how to avoid it. Okay, here's another premature puberty paper from soy. Okay, dietary genistein causes growth of estrogen-dependent breast cancers. Okay, this is again from a paper from this Allred guy. He wrote multiple papers on the cancer effects. So here it is, human breast cancer cells in vivo, their culture. Okay, so now here's a paper saying that it actually, women who ate a lot of soy or ate some soy in their childhood had less breast cancer in the premenopausal Chinese woman. No association with that in the postmenopausal breast cancer. Well, the vast majority of breast cancer is postmenopausal. Here's another one that says it's not associated with breast cancer. So, you know, and the reason I go through all this is a lot of people are trying to claim that, oh, soy is some super food that all breast cancer patients should be eating, and I don't believe there's good evidence to strongly support that. I realize there's some evidence that supports that, but I think there's a lot of contradictory evidence, and usually when you see contradictory evidence about a food, especially the old stuff tends to be more true before all this corporate bias has gotten into the medical literature. Nowadays, a big rich company, they'll just buy the journal, they'll buy the scientists, they can publish whatever they want. So here's another article. This comes from a Harvard publication, actually 2007 and this was associated with the American Cancer Society, and their conclusion was there is very little human data on the role of phytoestrogens in preventing breast cancer recurrence, and the few studies conducted do not support a protective role. Okay, well that's pretty strong words, okay, in the way scientific literature writes. And you know, here's some more papers. I don't want to go through all this. It's kind of boring, but here's something I think you'll find good. You can look at these articles if you want for yourself, but look at how much estrogenic chemicals there are, phytoestrogens in soy. Here's the genistein. Look at this. Units of estrogenic chemistry, like 5,400. And then you go to something else, like, let's go to like a tomato, 0.1, dried dates, 1, okay, a carrot, 0. Okay, so for soy to be at like 5,000 and flax at 160,000 units of estrogen chemicals, they're off the charts, Total phytoestrogens in soy beyond the genistein. It's got other estrogens in there, like Dagen, for example. There's tons of them. These are incredibly high levels of estrogen, okay? You know, this is like what's subsidized. Soy is subsidized then it's sprayed with an estrogenic chemical, glyphosate, and then corn is sprayed with a super estrogenic atrazine. Basically, stuff that's subsidized is estrogenic, a lot of it, and it's increasing people's risk of becoming feminized and infertile. We showed this, how soy is super high in the many thousands compared to these other foods, and the flax is like over 100,000 times, and it's unbelievably how high. It's so high, it's literally amazing. Okay. Soy protein has greater effect. Let's see, what's this one about? postmenopausal women had the greatest effect on IGF. So soy was known to significantly increase IGF, insulin-like growth factor. Well, insulin-like growth factor is associated with cancer. So that's what I'm saying is, how could soy, first of all, be super estrogenic and have elevated IGF and be high fat, and have heme iron? All those things are associated with increased cancer risk. But then it gets this perfect bill of health. Oh no, it's perfect, okay? And people get emotional about it. Most people don't really have much thinking ability. And so when their position is challenged, they just get emotional. And I've had all these trolls, will come and make comments. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, right. It's pretty obvious. Anyone could look at the paper. There's lots and lots of papers showing problems with soy. Do phytoestrogens reduce the risk of breast cancer recurrence? Okay, this paper says, so far not enough evidence exists on which to base guidelines for use. Okay, pros and cons. And the short-term study suggests soy increases breast cancer risk according to the conclusions here. Conflicting data on this 2005 paper suggests soy may increase or decrease risk. They can't tell. And usually when you start seeing that, that means it either has no effect or it's a negative effect. I'm always amazed, though, how easy a company can just publish a whole bunch of fake articles to promote their product. If a company's got money, and soy company's got a lot of money, they can publish whatever they want. That's why I would trust the older papers. Okay, alters developmental weight gain and food intake in pregnant rats. Oh yeah, this is the concept of epigenetic obesity. If the mother eats a lot of high fat stuff, and in this case it was soy in mice, but it could be other things. It can then cause an epigenetic change in the baby and make it more prone to obesity its whole life. Farmers in the United States will tend to alternate soybeans and corn every year. They're both subsidized. Soy is a legume, so it adds nitrogen to the soil. Corn the next year will gobble up the nitrogen. Soy is easy to grow. The beans are relatively round, easy to harvest, and it grows relatively straight. You can crowd the plants together. So from a commercial point of view, for a commodity, it's profitable. Non-organic soy is genetically modified and to be resistant to the herbicides like glyphosate. But who knows? That genetic modification stuff, nobody knows that that's safe. I would bet you that it probably isn't, but do I know that for sure? No, I don't. But why take a risk with something like that? Chemical processing food companies, they process soy. They often use hexane to extract it as a solvent. That's a toxic petrochemical that's known to be neurotoxic. Anthony J, the PhD chemist specializing in lipids, he's got a YouTube channel called Dr. Anthony J. It's great. And he talks about overpromotion of soy being like soy zealotry. And here's something else too. You're going to see some doctors, including some famous ones, and they're going to say, oh, soy is good. But you listen to them talk. They will never, I've watched a bunch of those videos. They never mention its increase in ILGF. They never mention it has heme iron. That's strange for a plant to have heme iron in it. Increased heme iron is associated with increased risk of cancer, typically with meat, for example. It's processed with hexane, typically a neurotoxin. How could that be good, eating something processed with a neurotoxin? Some of it's going to get into the food. It's GMO. There's no reason to believe there's any benefit from that. It's sprayed with glyphosate, a very powerful chemical. The lady Stephanie Seneff writes all the time about what a terrible toxic substance that is. There's a whole bunch of additive things that make the herbicide, pesticide more powerful, and we don't even know what they are. So you're basically taking random toxic chemicals and ingesting them whenever you ingest non-organic soy. Okay, and we also know that it causes significant binding to the ER alpha receptors. It's not just the ER beta receptors. Okay, look at the Stefan Mueller paper, for example. It's high in fat. Things that are high fat tend to increase cancer risk, increase obesity risk. It's very high in protein. Dr. Anthony J. also says there was some paper that showed some activation of opioid receptors. That's sort of a side thing. I don't know the significance of that, but all I'm saying is you've got all this data. I mean, why would you want to mess around with the food to have all this negative data? And I think one of the confounding variables is the relationship to dairy, and we're going to talk about that because dairy is a major poison, and that's pretty well known. So when you quit dairy and you have soy, there's other things that happen. Okay, developmental exposure to phytoestrogens in soy, new findings and implications. Soy-based infant formulas. Human infants consuming these products can have genistein levels about 20 times greater than those seen in vegetarian adults. So the kids are more sensitive to having high levels of the phytoestrogens from soy. And comparable exposures in animals cause adverse effects. And there's something early that she says in early development called a mini puberty, and she's very concerned, this author, about a potential estrogenic chemical exposure on these children, and they show how you get this big bump in phytoestrogens, and this could be occurring, they think it is, during the developmental window, which could be damaging to the child. So having these soy formulas and whatnot as a child and soy milks might be damaging the child's future fertility, in the opinion of these authors. Okay. So here's another point they make. Usually in a person, we talked about their estrogen level in a premenopausal female is about 20 picograms per milliliter at its lowest, and 400 picograms per milliliter at its highest. In a guy, it stays about 20 picograms all the time per milliliter. And so what's the point? The blood concentration in an infant of this genistein isoflavone can be 13,000, 22,000 times higher than their plasma estrogen levels. So the food ingested estrogen can have a dominant effect because it's many thousands of times higher in concentration. So that's very worrisome. Okay? Oops, I went a slide. I skipped a slide. I want to go back one. These are showing some of the things that was associated with the soy. And a lot of this is in animal studies, but some stuff has been shown in humans. Change in the vaginal epithelium, estrogenic effect. Change in uterus size, estrogenic effect. Change in breast development, estrogenic effect. Heavier menstruation, estrogenic effect. Increased adult risk of endometriosis, according to one of these papers. Probable increased risk of infertility. Increased risk of uterine cancer in mice. Okay, here we're showing some abnormalities. This is a mouse here, but there was some paper agent. Where is it? I'll come to it somewhere in here. I have it somewhere. Okay, but anyways, showing abnormal cellular development in the lining of the uterus and the fallopian tubes. Okay, well, that's a pretty big deal. If you damage the lining of the uterus and the fallopian tube, you increase the risk of infertility. That's not good. Okay, and in the opinion of these authors, there should be a warning on any soy formula package for these potential adverse effects to help parents make informed choices. Okay, and here was a study, ADGENT, A-D-G-E-N-T et al., 2018. There is direct evidence that soy formula feeding is associated with estrogen-induced changes in human female reproductive tract. That's an important statement because it's not just an animal study. This is some direct evidence. This is sort of a famous paper, ADGENT in 2018. Okay, given the large body of evidence from animal studies indicating genistein exposure has adverse health outcomes later in life, is it really a good idea to be giving these babies soy formula? It's a way to make, to do harm to them, make them infertile, or, oh crap, this thing is like running away on my, I gotta go back a little bit here. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about having tons. Okay, and McDougall, here, I'll show you what McDougall says. McDougall says, if a person wants to eat soy, they should limit it to 5% of calories or less. Okay, McDougall knows there's problems with soy, but he's got better personality, social skills than I do, and he's got a business. You're going to get anybody who criticizes soy, all of a sudden there'll be all these trolls, and there'll be hassles to you, and some negative stuff will happen to you if you criticize soy. So I'll probably get some negative outflow, or the video will get shadow banned or something. Oh crap. All right, traditional arguments in favor of soy. Most of this, like people say, well, what about the Asians? They ate soy, but they would eat relatively small amounts of relatively unprocessed soy, not the GMO, highly processed stuff we're eating. Plus, they were eating relatively small amounts. What if they say it binds to the good receptor? Well, we talked about it. It also binds a bad receptor, and it can be present in very high amounts. What if they say it's not goitrogenic? There's also already plenty of evidence in humans, and plenty of evidence in mice, but there's also some evidence in humans. We talked about some of those papers. What about people who say, well, the bad press on soy comes mostly from the dairy industry who's competitive? Well, there is some truth that dairy badmouths soy and soy badmouths dairy, but Okay, we pretty much covered all that. I don't want to talk too much about flax. I don't think flax is a good idea, but it's not really what I get in. We don't need to talk anymore about baby formula. I think it's a bad idea. But I want to mention something from this slide. So here's this lady, Christy Funk. She's probably the most famous breast surgeon in the world, taking care of breast cancer. And, she'll quote this paper here and say, oh, this paper, Messina was the lead investigator on this paper, showed that soy and its isoflavones are not endocrine disruptors. There is no adverse alteration in thyroid function, estrogen levels, ovulation in women, semen levels in men, no negative effects on children. Oh, doesn't that just sound wonderful? Well, hold on a sec. Who wrote this paper? This guy Messina. Okay, here's this guy. He's the executive director of the Soy Nutrition Institute. That's about as soy corporate as it gets. He's probably a bright guy, and he's an associate professor at Loma Linda. But I'll just tell you, in my personal experience, anything corporate funding, you have to be concerned about the possibility of bias, okay? How could soy have tons and tons and tons of problem, and all of a sudden, when the head of the Soy Institute writes a paper, he says, nope, you're wrong, there's no problems. I personally find that hard to believe, okay? We know there's GMO. We know there's glyphosate. We know there's glyphosate additives. We know there's heme iron. We know it increases ILGF. We know it's high fat. We know it's high in omega-6 fats. Okay, all this stuff is bad. We know it's processed with hexane quite often. We know it's high in protein. All of these things are bad. So, now you're going to tell me it's great? I find that hard to believe. Okay, here's the actual paper, from Messina as the primary investigator. Okay, so there's very good reason to be concerned about the possibility of bias there. Okay, here's some other paper. There's a confounding variable, and this is what I think is a big confounding variable. When people quit dairy, which is a major poison, and they go to soy, which in my opinion is a minor poison, they also tend to eat more plant foods. It tends to be a switch in a person's diet from sort of a processed food and meat and dairy-based diet to one that's more plant-based diet, and soy milk is being part of that. And what I'm saying is, I think these so-called benefits of soy, a lot of them are because they're eating more plant foods, and that's the protective effect, and it helps hide the negative aspect of soy. All right, so here's another thing that's interesting. When they quit the meat and dairy, they have more soy, but they also tend to have more plant foods. And by getting rid of these major poisons of meat and dairy, that makes the soy look good. And you should always be a little bit suspect when a food or a chemical's had all these problems on all the old papers and the animal studies, but all of a sudden, once it becomes $1 billion corporate food, it's like becomes an angel with no problems. To me, that sounds like BS. I don't believe it. My job is to tell you the truth. I got no sponsors. I don't make 10 cents for this. I just do it because I'm an egomaniac. I want to prove I'm a great doctor. I got nothing else to do. My kids are grown up. I don't spend that much time with my wife, so I'm sitting around here bored. And I read all the papers and the journals, and I'm like, oh gosh, there's so much crap in these papers and journals. Somebody needs to tell the poor pros, the poor people the truth. So I'll do it. Even though I get hardly any views, the truth will be here. Here's a paper written about scientific regress. Well, the gist of this paper here by William Wilson, May 2016, in this First Things article was that 65% of psychology studies, they cannot replicate the results. For pharmaceutical company studies, 75%, they cannot replicate the results. So what I'm saying is there is literally tons. More often than not, the studies you read in these journals are not true. They are not true. That's a big deal. And why is that? Because the corporations buy the journals and they pressure the scientists, whoever they are, to publish what they want. If a scientist does not publish what the company wants, they will never get another job again. Even worse than that, if a scientist publishes a paper that says a corporate product is bad, they could be fired from that. I have a friend who's a molecular biologist, and his friend published a paper showing that mercury often would get into foods made with high fructose corn syrup. And guess what? He got fired from his job for that, for telling the truth, okay? So that's what's bad about modern science. If a scientist makes a significant finding and shows that a corporate profitable product is bad, they routinely get fired from their jobs. That is a common thing. The guy who did the research on atrazine, I think his name was Timothy Hayes or something like that, he got in all kinds of trouble for telling the truth about atrazine being highly estrogenic, all right? All right, now here's a quote from Aristotle. A thing cannot be one thing and not be the thing. If you got all these papers saying soy is estrogenic, how could it all of a sudden not be estrogenic at all? Sounds like BS, okay? Here's a quote from Ayn Rand. She said, if you think there's a contradiction, recheck your premises. Contradictions do not exist. Whenever you think you're facing a contradiction, check your premises. You will find that one of them is wrong, okay? And so what I would say is, my speculation here is that what I would expect is probably wrong is believing corporate-funded research, because the reason they're funding the research is because they want to get a result that shows their product is good. And if it doesn't show their product is good, they probably won't publish it. Companies do that all the time. If a study doesn't show a benefit to the product, they just don't publish it. So anything that gets published, you can bet it almost always is positive towards their product. Corporate-sponsored research, the vast majority of it is not true. So you got to look back to earlier papers, because otherwise, you'll hear all these things like, why caffeine, alcohol, they're all good, right? Yeah, BS. So what is the truth? Like I said, anything that doesn't promote a product doesn't get published. One of the reasons why I believe T. Colin Campbell and his researchers are plausible biochemistry mechanisms. They tried to fire the guy from Cornell. He deserves a Nobel Prize. So what happens to him? They try to fire him. And that's sort of what happens in the modern world. If you try to do something new from convention that the corporations don't want, they'll try to get you fired from your job, or they'll try to cause other problems for you. So that's a sign that something, unfortunately, that's a sign something true. And I'm talking about real problems. They were really trying to fire him. This was not some BS like Jordan Peterson potentially going to lose some psychology certificate or some BS he doesn't even care about. That's what I would call a fake problem. Just trying to make somebody look good. Okay, modern researchers have tremendous incentive to lie. It's unbelievable. They're rewarded for lying, and they're punished for telling the truth. That is a bad setup. Okay, if they don't praise the company that gave them money to do the research, they'll never get hired again. They'll potentially even get fired. If they piss off the company, they will get fired. And I can also tell you, you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again because it's true. You have to have a God-based system. Otherwise, you cannot do research in the modern world. The reason is, if you don't believe humans are created in the image of God and you have a moral obligation to tell them the truth and be nice to them and try to help them, then they're just talking monkeys. You have no reason to be obligated to them. Your obligation is wherever the money comes from, okay? And it comes from big corporations. And so that's why I'm telling you, look at the Ivy League psychiatrists giving all these drugs to these children. They're poisoning kids with all these attention deficit drugs on a chronic basis. They know the long-term results are not that good. But when you don't have a God-based system, you will have people poison children to make money, okay, as well as poison adults, of course. It's crap, but you can't get around it. And the average stupid person will say, oh, well, you don't need God to do science and research. You may not need God to do a single isolated experience, but let me tell you something. You need it, structuring the entire system, or otherwise it'll become evil and corrupt and guided only by profit. And there's a heck of a lot more money in promoting toxic substances than there is in actually doing something that helps people and teaching them what helps them. Okay, look at aspartame. This is described in Food Forensic by Mike Adams. This is a good book, 2016. And here's what I'm getting at. Some guy wrote a 1,038-page book about all the problems with aspartame, this artificial sweetener. This guy, John Olin, is brilliant scientist, another guy who should have won a Nobel Prize, writing all about excitotoxicity and that aspartame causes brain injury. He knew that back in 1970. Well, when they want to get approval, the company real quick can get 100 studies showing that aspartame is safe. So I don't know exactly what was in those studies, but what I'm just trying to say is corporations somehow with their $1 billion can come up with a whole bunch of studies saying their product is good. It's very easy for them to do that. And that's what's kind of frightening. And T. Colin Campbell said it before too. He goes, reductionist scientists can produce any result you want it to. There's corporations that basically that's what they do for a living, is generate bogus research to make companies happy, corporations happy. And so here's what I said. You basically are stuck with this seesaw between dairy and meat versus soy and plants. And soy is being made to look good because you get the crap out of the diet, the dairy and the meat, you increase the plants, and that makes soy look good. And that's my theory for one of the reasons that soy is so over-promoted, dramatically over-promoted. And like I said, it's got high omega-6s, it's high in protein, it increases ILGF, it's got heme iron. All of these are bad things. It does activate ER-alpha as well as beta, of course. There's tons of bad news about it in animals. It acts like a pesticide towards the animal that eats it. America's got more and more infertility associated with eating more soy and glyphosate. Male sperm production is down, down, down. Soy's been known to do that. The pregnant woman eating these estrogenic chemicals, not just soy but all the other ones as well, is thought to increase the risk of her baby being fat and infertile. Who the heck knows what's going on with GMO? Besides the glyphosate, there's all the additives in there. This lady, Stephanie Seneff, PhD from MIT, she's given tons of lectures and written books about how bad it is, the glyphosate stuff. The hexane processing with that neurotoxin's got to be bad. Many processed foods, they tend to, cause all kinds of sickness problems. And so soy is the bad bean. It's uniquely estrogenic. And my final conclusion is anything that estrogenic, it would have to do my laundry, cook for me, and please me in bed, or I would avoid it. So I think soy is a bad idea. Hope that was helpful.